Hello and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy, and governance. I am Hamza Idris. The Bureau of Public Service Reforms has put the number of Nigeria's workforce at the federal level at 720,000. With this workforce, the government has been spending a large chunk of its annual budget on payment of salaries and pensions of retired and serving federal civil servants. With a wage bill of around 3.75 trillion naira in 2021, 3.88 trillion naira in 2022, the 2023 wage bill, according to the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, will go up about 5.33 trillion naira, which is 29.6% of federal government's expenditure based on the medium-term expenditure framework. The rising cost of wage bill, as well as continuous concerns about reducing cost of governance, had led the federal government to introduce several initiatives, including the introduction of the Integrated Payroll and Personnel Information System, IPPIS, and Treasury Single Account, TSA, to checkmate the activities of ghost workers and fraud in the service. Another initiative was the formation of the Presidential Committee on Restructuring and Rationalization of Federal Government Parastatals, Commissions, and Agencies under the chairmanship of Steve Orosai, a former head of the Federal Civil Service. 10 years later, the committee's 800-page report, which recommended the abolition and merger of hundreds of government agencies and parastatals, is yet to be implemented. To discuss these issues on the program, we are joined by the Director General of the Bureau of Public Service Reforms, Dasuki Arabi. We are also joined by a retired Federal Permanent Secretary, Dr. Hakeem Baba Ahmed. Together, we will be discussing Nigeria's public service and how it can be reformed. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
We will take a break now, and when we return, the discussion commences. Politics, yeah. Maybe I should start with Dr. Hakeem. What should we understand by public service reform? A big one.
And it is. It's first, let's start with public service. There are two components of the service that have been merged into public service. You have the mainstream civil service, people who are employed by the federal government in generally career positions, who perform the basic services that we associate with civil service. They do basic routine work of governance. They advise the political level. They provide policy stability. They create a policy environment that sustains governance. You remember the political level is relatively fast changing.
Yes.
People come and go, politicians. And civil servants do the nitty-gritty work of governance. Now, the other component of public service are people who hold either elective or appointive positions in governance.
Okay.
Even the president is a public servant.
Okay.
People who are generally considered to be outside the civil service, but organically related to the civil service, and who operate with the civil service and operate with the same values. And I think in the last 20 years, the administration of President Obasanjo changed the civil service rule.
Okay.
And made it into the public service rule.
Okay.
And brought some semblance of similarity and uniformity in terms of the rules governing the civil service, as well as many of the parastatals and agencies of government, as well as some of the operations and conduct of public officers. There are other agencies that give the public service its identity. agencies that are supposed to oversee the public service, not just the civil service. Now you have the Civil Service Commission, but there are also there are those that oversee the actual functioning of public service. My brother's job here has to do with that wider mandate.
Yeah.
So reform here, again, it's a big issue. Some reforms are comprehensive. For instance, the attempt that have been made for the last 10 years under the so-called Orasanya report to reform the public
which we'll actually discuss.
Yes, which we will discuss. That may be reform, but there have been other initiatives or changes that are introduced, either single-handedly, I mean, alone on their own, or dramatic in many ways, that represent deep-seated reforms. Some of them are done quietly. Their effects are profound. Some of them are done with a lot of noise, a lot of heat. But reform here simply means affecting change in the manner, either routine or extraordinary manner in which the public service operates. Good. So public service reforms refers to changes or shifts in the way either the foundational philosophies or operations are done, or the effects that are expected to be gotten from there.
Thank you very much. DG, yes, in August 2021, during a meeting with directors of reform coordination and service improvements in MDS, you said the new Nigeria National Strategy for Public Service Reform, the acronym NSPSR, will provide a common vision for rebuilding and transformation of the federal public service in the country. This was August 2021. How far have you gone with that movement?
Well, thank you very much. Let me add to what my senior brother has stated. Reforms in a wider perspective is just aims by government to change the way things are done by public servants or government workers, the structure of the institutions of government, and to address new challenges that emerge in the process of growth of human beings, communities, countries, and services. Now, the Bureau has been working around a document that we call the National Strategy on Public Service Reforms. Yeah. Certainly, if any house that is built without a plan,
it will collapse.
It will collapse.
Yeah. So
that has been our working document over the years. And NSPSR has 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is looking at socio-economic environment. How do we make the agencies of government to be user-friendly, corruption-free, very neat, well-organized, with a system that is working? Pillar 2 is looking at national development plans. For many years, Nigeria had dropped out from countries that were running or managing development plans. BPSI came with that and make it the center of focus of Pillar 2 of the National Strategy on Public Service Reforms. We're glad and always happy to say that it was that document that laid the foundation for the ERGP that this government came up with and the current National Development Plan that is being implemented. Pillar 3 is looking at public financial management. When the Permanent Secretary was in service, they're among the crazy guys in the service that were selected to drive radical reforms that seemed almost impossible. When they were saying pay slips, payrolls, everything would be digitalized, a lot of people then thought himself, Adego Roy and others were crazy. Now, what have we done in the last 10, 15, 20 years? We have succeeded in digitalizing public financial management 100%. No agency, no ministry of government uses paper to raise voucher for payments for any other thing that it's done. So if we look at that pillar, we have succeeded 100% in achieving what we have set for ourselves. Budget processes have been improved, digitalized by a certain percentage. Procurement, a lot of improvement from due process to Bureau of Public Procurement, Bureau of Public Enterprises, power reforms. And beyond that, we had gone as government or as public service over the years to improve generation, management of taxes by Federal Inland Revenue Service. Within the National Strategy on Public Service Reforms, we've said we want to have a public service that by the year 2025 will be among the first 20.
In the next 3 years.
Yes, will be among the first 20 leading services in the world.
20?
Yes. Now, how do we do that? We have identified agencies of government that we call building blocks. They have already reached that level of world standard, yes, excellence. And it's just a pity that we are not doing well around corporate communication. But we have some of them that on weekly basis, monthly basis, have people visiting from other countries to see how Nigeria has succeeded in introducing Treasury Single Account, BVN, and other reforms that are around Pillar 3 of the National Strategy on Public Service Reforms. Pillar 4 is looking at the core civil service. As the Permanent Secretary has said, they are the ones that develop policies, they lay the environment, they drive and supervise parastatals of government. Now, what we are doing there is to see how we transform the civil service to be an agile service that is ready for change, that is ready to operate under this rapid changing environment. Along this line, government, we have introduced performance management system to hold public servants responsible, to hold them, to make them accountable, and to know that beyond coming to work and signing a register, somebody is going to ask you around your KPIs whether you have performed or you have not performed.
And they are measurable.
Yes, they are measurable. Beyond this, we have introduced succession planning and mentorship, so that we'll have the younger ones groomed, trained, ready to take over position of leadership as the seniors are existing. You cannot have a public service that is working if the skills needed are not entrenched. So around that, we've introduced quite a lot of capacity development programs, Smart P, Lead P, so that
which we'll also discuss more on. But I want, Doctor, to say something, because the DG has said some reforms, the initiatives, different categories. But out there is this impression that there is system collapse, to use it mildly, in the civil service. And this prompted government at all levels. You see them as, forming ad hoc committees to do certain things, which ordinarily level 7, 8, 9 officers in the main civil service should do. Do you really agree there is institutional collapse in Nigeria?
Well, there's collapse of virtually all critical institutions in Nigeria, without any doubt. The last decade has been a decade of major setbacks for Nigeria. Virtually all public, including security and law and order institutions, including the judiciary. There is no organ involved in governance that has not suffered massive setbacks. So I think that there was very little to argue about that. Whether the public service or the civil service has suffered a collapse, but certainly I think it's inevitable. See, by its nature, the civil service is substantially unprotected if its leadership is vulnerable to the schemes and the designs of the political level. That's the first thing.
Okay.
Its rules alone don't protect it. And civil service, public service rules are very powerful, they're very strong. But if the political level wants to breach it and pollute or corrupt the civil service, either because they don't like the leadership of the civil service or the public service, or they want to increase the scope for patronage, they want more access into public service revenues, or they don't understand how the public service, civil service works, and they just want to change things. We used to work with ministers who would walk into your office as a permanent secretary and say, listen, you have 35 years to retire. I have only 4 years to go. So stop telling me everything is not possible. Stop telling me all progress. So if the political level can protect the public service, the public service will do well. If the political level is not interested in protecting and shielding the civil service from abuse, neglect, and corruption of the political level, it collapses. And what we saw in the last 10 years, substantially, maybe 10, 12 years, is a systemic collapse of the public service, largely because the political level saw the public service as a liability. Look, what do you hear? What is the most recurrent thing you hear about someone? Cost of governance. When they talk about public service reform, they talk about cost of governance. When they talk about the civil service, they talk about size of the public service. These are the two things they talk about. Now, both of these cannot be understood outside the context, a wider context. Cost of governance, if you really want to understand the cost of governance, you have to break it down. How much does it cost the Nigerian economy to maintain 37 governments? A federal government, huge federal government, and 36 governments at state level. That's how you have to compute it. Then you have to go down below that and ask, where exactly do you spend this money?
Yeah.
Now, when in your introduction, you were talking about trillions and trillions.
Yes,
and
in salaries.
Only these people, 700 and something thousand.
Yes, 750,000.
They take away 3.5 trillion. People think, how can you justify this?
Out of 200 million people.
Yes, and politicians like doing this. They will say, how can 750,000 people
guzzle
this? You cannot understand the cost of governance only by reference to how much money you spend on the civil service, unless you link efficiency, productivity, and actually the service, the public service
Not
provides.
just measuring it in terms of monetary...
Yes, it's impossible to do that.
Yes.
But when the politician wants to take... let's take a simple example. Take government houses, all the 37 of them, including the villa. If it is possible to compute in budgetary terms, even though it's just paper, take just two things, the cost of maintaining government houses and the cost of security budget.
Yes.
These two, just these two, they are likely to amount almost as much as you pay every civil servant in this country.
Wow.
But because the politician speaks and
They
the civil
speak more.
servant doesn't,
Yes.
and the civil servant doesn't, all you hear about reforms is that you need to reduce the size of the public service and government will make money. And that's a fallacy, because you can reduce the civil service to a quarter of what it is. And if the politician wants to use and blame the public service for that, he will do that.
Yes.
Now, so there's a job for the civil service to do. It is misunderstood. It doesn't have a voice of its own. The little voice it has comes from people like Dasuki here.
Yes, and that is why I want him to respond to some of the issues you raised. Political interference. He has retired as permanent secretary. You introduced him as some of the radical permanent secretaries. They were able to do so many things. How are you coping with politicians in actually making some of these reforms that Nigerians have been yearning for? I am adding this to the fact that this issue of reform is a recurrent thing since the creation of Nigeria.
Well, thank you. Let me start by saying that there have been reforms before our reforms that they started. And all the reforms that have been coming up or initiated were looking at one or two aspects of public service. Now, what we are leading is a whole of government approach, looking at the entire public service, the structure, the institution, and the persons, the personnel, to see how can we make changes and make them look better. As far as we're concerned, we have little or nothing to do with politicians. We have tried as much as we can to be guided by the strategy plan that we have put in place. We try as much as possible to push it forward and see that we implement these reforms. Now, generally, in the whole world now, there are a lot of attention is being focused on the public service. People are demanding for service, people are demanding for value for money, and they are asking questions, what are you doing? What are you doing to improve my life as ordinary citizen? Not only in Nigeria. Now, this has compelled the politicians, whether they like it or they don't like, to support us and help us to do what we are doing if they want to do. If they don't want to, well, they can leave us. But the international community, the development partners are helping us and pushing us to do the little that we are able to do. As I have been saying, there are two things. Either politicians and everybody agrees, follow us, and we implement these changes, realize our set objectives, or we refuse to do that and we fall by the line. That is why you find a lot of people making noise about Rwanda. Rwanda is smaller than Gombe State,
Yeah.
if you put it there, in size and everything. But development partners, everybody is going there. So we either do it, get it right, attract that attention and support, or we remain where we are.
Yes. Yes, Doctor. Do you look at it with nostalgia? The civil service you actually joined, you worked under, you served for almost 10 years. You inherited a certain system from some people, and then when you leave behind certain structure for others to actually follow. Have you seen them really following the footpath you also followed, looking at the civil service of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, up till your time?
I'm going to ask you to be a little bit patient with me, Hamza, because it is important to situate the public service through some certain stages or key developments.
Okay.
And I will show you some of the linkages between the political level. First of all, the civil servant has always been, it's an instrument at the service of the political level, whether it's military or civilian.
Yes.
You must see it as that. And it's entirely as an instrument. And substantially, it is only an instrument to the degree that the political level allows it to be that. They can change it. Let me take you through a number of key stages quickly.
Yes.
In the 70s, I think you were in school then. You must have heard about Udoji.
I went to school around
You went-
78.
okay. So you didn't know about Udoji.
But we read.
Udoji was the after the Civil War, Nigerian government had so much money that they were thinking of what to do. They were looking for what to do, and somebody came up with this brilliant. Why don't you raise the salary of civil servants and even pay them arrears? And we were kids then. And we remember this time when virtually every civil servants were buying motorcycles, marrying second and third wives, and nobody forgot that. It was the first time the Nigerian federal government was just dishing out money to civil servants.
Wow.
Now, people consider that as reform. Suddenly, you paid a huge amount of money to civil servants. And Udoji remains one of the reference points for the first time that civil servants went through and their income was improved, and people remember it with great nostalgia. The second, what I think is a major event that occurred, what happened under Murtala Muhammad, and I think this is one of the rather negative event, because it was an event. Under an otherwise great leadership. He lasted for only 6 months, but under him, under Obasanjo. And this was the deliberate targeting of senior civil servants, permanent secretaries, because the military that came to power after Gowon saw them as enjoying too much power.
Wow. The civil servant.
Yes, permanent secretaries.
Super permanent.
Yes.
secretary.
And they call them super permanent secretaries, they call them everything. These were people who exercised tremendous amount of influence, but they also did great job for the country. The military doesn't know anything about governance. They take power and they don't know what to do with the country. So they need civil servants. And these civil servants had stayed for them. Gowon had stayed for 9 years as head of state. And some permanent secretaries had been there with him. But the Murtala Obasanjo administration saw them in very hostile terms. And large numbers of civil servants were just simply retired, just for being there.
Wow.
And that was a major dent in terms of the morale and the efficacy.
It affected maybe the psyche of...
Yes, and it was a major setback for the public service, because for the first time it exposed the public service directly to the fact that, oh, these people can be touched by the political level, because although they were military, they were also political level people. And particularly for us in the north, most of the best and the brightest of those civil servants that were removed were northerners, who were rendering fantastic service. But the military has stigmatized them as people who were corrupt or people who had enjoyed too much power and go on. But so they were just retired and sent home. The next event that happened under Babangida. A number of reforms were set in motion in the 80s. Decree 43, I think of 1986, either 86, allowed the top echelon of the civil service, directors and permanent secretaries, to be recruited from outside the service.
So you can be one without really following
I
the
was
ladder.
one of them. I was in a classroom teaching. I was
were
literally in
pulled
Sokoto,
out.
yes, and I was told I was appointed a permanent secretary in my state government, whether it's at the federal or state government.
Permanent secretary is permanent secretary.
Permanent secretary? No. I was appointed a permanent secretary in 1987, and I came literally with a chalk in my hand, and I became a permanent secretary.
But
And I
probably
served
you
as a
were well
permanent
equipped
secretary.
in the university.
Well,
or other
the governor who
experiences.
appointed me, then it was a military government. He said he was told that I could do the job. Well,
see?
the fact that I survived for 4.5 years perhaps suggests that I did well. But it was an extremely unpopular with the civil service, with the mainstream civil service, because what it did was to open a window for non-civil servants to occupy the top echelon.
Yeah.
In the longer term, what it did, which was good for the federal civil service, not necessarily for the state civil service, was that a huge number of these people who came in from outside the civil service joined state, eventually ended up moving to the federal level. And there was a time when I was a permanent secretary, I was a permanent secretary for 10 years. There was a period when about 30 of us who were federal permanent secretaries were all people who came from outside the civil service at some stage or the other as a result of the decree. Of course, the decree was repealed later because there was so much backlash from the civil service. They didn't like it. The mainstream civil service, the traditional civil servant.
Yes.
Now, then...
Thank you. Maybe we'll take a short break, Doctor, so that you now, because it's very interesting what he's talking about, and there are some of the salient issues that I really want us to discuss, how people that were taken from outside, they joined the public service, the role they played, and then vis-a-vis the Orosanye report, which much touted. But we will take a short break, and when we return, the discussion continues. Stay with us.
Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
If you are just joining us, this is Daily Politics on Trust TV. Remember, you can follow the conversation on our various social platforms on Facebook, Instagram, and watch us live on YouTube. Welcome back. Yes, Didi, maybe I should start with you. The Orosanye report. Last month, as August, President Muhammadu Buhari directed that the provisions should be reviewed. This report, even though many people, including myself, to be honest, did not read the comprehensive report. But among the salient issues there was that there will be merger of hundreds of agencies. And this report, over 10 years, it was commissioned by the previous administration, it was submitted, but back and forth. What is really the problem? Because your agency is partly responsible for implementing if I'm not wrong, in this report?
Well, thank you very much. Before I go to that, the permanent secretary was speaking about people that were recruited from outside the public service that became high flyers within the service. The National Strategy on Public Service Reforms is trying to bring this back. We're trying to reset the public service to make it attractive for people to leave World Bank and come and join the public service.
Okay.
We're trying to see that government introduce an exchange program where public servants will go to the private sector, work with them, pick what is good there and come back. Then private workers of private companies will come in, learn the best things that
Meaning you want the opposite of what is happening now?
Yes, yes. So we believe that by the time this strategy is fully implemented, we'll be able to achieve that. Now, on Orosanye report, before Orosanye report, there has been Bureau of Public Service Reforms. People that my permanent secretary here had been part of the team that started the work that we've been doing. Orosanye was just trying to accelerate the rate of reforms. If you look at the public service 25 years ago and what we have today, quite a number of reforms and initiatives have come to play, most of them silently without even people knowing that these changes have taken place. Orosanye BPSR is the secretariat of the Implementation Committee. The Implementation Committee is chaired by the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, and there are permanent secretaries, director generals that are members of the Implementation Committee. Certainly for changes in government and other reasons, the report was not implemented. But that has not deterred BPSR from working to continue implementing reforms, some that have been identified by the Orosanye Report Committee.
You mean maybe privately you are maybe picking one or two of them?
No, not privately.
Okay.
Of course, government is doing. Let me look at the Petroleum Industry Act. Well, that is one of the things that Orosanye recommended. It has come to play. It's given birth to NNPC Limited.
Even though the subsidy is still there. Anyway.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Then you look at appointment of board members, because quite a number of boards of agencies had no board members, no chairman. Orosanye said this should come into place.
But this was 2011.
Yes, government have done that. So most of the silent issues that they have identified, government has been tackling them gradually. But the major thing that has not been done is for government to come out and say we're implementing Orosanye report. Now, with all that Orosanye, a lot of things have happened within the service of wider magnitude than Orosanye report. But you are aware, just as you've said, the two committees have been constituted. They have reviewed. Of course, government cannot implement what came into place in 2012. Yes, so because of the length of time that the report was not implemented, these committees were set up to review some of the recommendations of Orosanye report. A lot of agencies were created after Orosanye.
Which I want us to talk later, but
Yes.
I want your take, Doctor. Yes. What is your take on the Orosanye report? Is there any politics surrounding it, and is it going to work? Will merging agencies change anything? Will it reduce cost of governance? Multiple questions, but I think I should ask.
I have to say, in all honesty, I know very little about actual details contained in the report. I know about the philosophy behind it. I know that the Orosanye report fed from a very deep-seated need for reforms. In fact, the BPRS was founded precisely because the government, it was clear the public service needed a Bureau for Public Service Reform that will institutionalize routine reform. And these two words are important. Institutionalize. That means it's not a special occasion when you reform.
Yes.
Every single day reform is going on.
Yeah,
And
well,
their
they are
main work is
continuous.
not to advise on big white paper events. It is to daily feed the scene. Now, there are two issues here. One that appear to have been neglected is you needed a policy think tank on policy and administration. And you needed to address the issue of structures and institutions.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line, because the conception of the Oresharyan report was faulty from day one, they just simply thought, okay, merge is cost of living, cost of governance,
yeah.
too many parastatals, too many agencies. And the so-called Oresharyan report, first of all, it wasn't Steve Oresharyan report.
Okay, what is it?
He was the head of service then. But so many things have happened after him.
Okay.
And the reason, I think...
Was it a technical thing or what?
It was a committee, I think, set up initially under the inspiration of Steve Oresharyan, who was then the head of service. Okay. It has gone through all sorts of mutations. My suspicion is that the reason why you haven't seen much out of it is substantially very little attention was paid to what exactly it will take to take 650 agencies of government, many of them founded by law,
yes.
rail them through a process that says merge, scrape, humanize,
abolish,
change the law,
yes.
abolish. Then the more difficult question, what do you do with the personnel? What do you do with civil servants who live there? So merging means nothing. You can merge 10 agencies, but all you end up is one huge agency that contained the former 9. It didn't make any sense.
So now, it's like half bottle and full.
Fundamental issues about reform, like are you addressing efficiency? Are you addressing cost? Are you improving the quality of output? Those are fundamental issues. Those were ignored because everybody was rushing to see, okay, can we take these 500 agencies and reduce them to, say, 200? And somehow in their minds, people thought, oh, that will reduce the cost of governance. If we can do this. And Steve Oresharyan himself sold this idea, and it's a dummy to the government. If we can do this, then I will go down in the history as the man who waved the magic wand and reduced the cost of governance.
Yes.
And yet, 10 years down the road, 10 years down the road, there's a lot of hostility, there's a lot of resistance, but more than anything else, the Steve Oresharyan report is still there somewhere. That's why even good journalists like you haven't been able to see it. Only my brother here have read it, and even
people have been sending some maybe snippets of it.
And even they have encountered a huge level of resistance from one, the political level, two, the senior levels of the management of the public service, because there are a lot of issues there people don't like. And because of the weakness of the political level, it's easy to sabotage the Oresharyan. And it's been sabotaged by the very people that have been supporting it from day one. This government has, administrations after administrations have been sabotaging this. What is better would have been to separate these two issues. The petroleum industry, it's a policy input. It's not about structures or institutions. It's a policy issue.
Will bring efficiency.
How do you streamline management of our oil and gas resources in such a way that the country gets the best that it can? So structures come in later, but you need a policy think tank. We still haven't been able to do that. NIPS was supposed to have done that. But NIPS somehow was just reduced to a training institute.
That is in Kuru, in Plateau, National Institute.
We need to once and for all just sit down and say, look, do we have 200 agencies that are doing nothing? Absolutely nothing.
Like weight and measure.
Yes, like weight and measures,
yes.
Which is an agency of government. There are many.
Yes.
There are huge numbers of agencies that exist. They have been antiquated by time. They have become irrelevant because their jobs are not, their functions are not needed anymore. Some of them are outrightly illegal because the law doesn't allow, for instance, the existence of some of them. There are regulatory agencies that have been overtaken. Now, I know I know we have time, but let me just give you an example about sometimes how reforms. Just take the police. It's not the mainstream.
Yes.
In the past, 7 agencies used to perform the job of the police. 7 existing agencies. The police itself, NDLEA, EFCC, ICPC, National Security Civil and Defense Corps. All these were works that were jobs of the Nigeria police. Over the last 20, 25 years, they will take a bit of the job of the police and
give another
agency.
person.
And they take a little bit. One consequence of that is that these agencies don't do the work as well as they do, and the Nigerian police is now an empty shell. And you can do the same thing with the public service, because if you don't apply a very good, high-quality thinking process, and you separate policy from structures and institutions, then you end up with what it is. They are doing fantastic work at the BPRS. What they're failing, where they're failing is to get inputs that feed directly into the governance. Now, in my time, they used to report to the head of service.
Okay.
After my time, they report to the secretary to the government, which creates...
At the time, the secretary to the government and the head of service, one person. I want you to pick from where he mentioned that margin or whatever abolition will not really reduce cost of governance. This is at a time when the National Assembly, sometimes at the prompting of the executive, they have introduced more than, hundreds of, or let me be mildly, hundreds of agencies, here and there, they call some commissions, agencies and all that. Are you worried? Because this is adding to the cost of governance while reducing efficiency.
Well, I am worried because a lot of Nigerians are not patriotic. Most of these things that you've said are linked to patriotism. When we look at the nation and cherish it, love it, we'll do things that will sustain it, that will make sure that we'll cherish, will polish, handle softly, that generations after us will do. National Assembly, I don't want to talk much about
Please
them.
Do,
no.
So that they will hear.
I don't want to talk
maybe
much
the doctor who will talk about
yes,
them.
about them, but they are Nigerians who are Nigerians. And we should all think Nigeria, drink Nigeria, eat Nigeria, and make Nigeria first before all of us. The moment we are able to do that, quite a number of these things will be phased out, and they will not even come up in the first instance. Now, Oronsaye's report, I don't want to discuss much about it because my boss is the chairman of the implementation committee, and 2 committees were constituted, the reports were submitted, and they've been forwarded to the president, to the Federal Executive Council for vetting and approval. So it would not be good for me to discuss anything around that. But just like the PAMSA has said, is it easy for you to scrap 500 agencies at a go?
Yes. Will you answer that for us?
Yes. It is not easy from my thinking, because when you want to scrap, a lot of things are involved. Just as he said, some of them were established through legislations. Executive arm of government cannot just come up and say we have scrapped this. They have to liaise with the National Assembly, and I'm glad that the National House of Reps have constituted a committee to look at some of these issues. Now, beyond that, if you send 500,000 people out of job,
or you move them from salary to pension, so you don't really address the cost of government.
Yes, do we have the monies to pay them off?
To pay them off, and to even maintain them, because as Nigerians, you cannot just lay them off. And
yes.
So it's a serious problem. But, Doctor, you see, even within government, you see people working in agencies earning more than 2,000 times compared to their counterparts working in ministries. For instance, someone working at maybe NNPC, one of the agencies, and another one working in Ministry of Petroleum. If you see them on the street, you will say, yes, this is the person working in Ministry of Petroleum, while this one is working at NNPC. But the DG here said their plan is to attract people not only from one government agency to join the civil service or public service, but people from outside. Are we going to see that in our lifetime?
Yes, it's possible, but we have to do some serious thinking, and unfortunately there isn't much of that. The issue of our discrepancies in income within the same service has always been there.
Okay.
It's informed by a recognition of the fact that some parts of government perform different functions, they have different skill needs, people, the challenges there are different, and the services they provide in terms of their input into the economy or governance is different. And you have a choice. For instance, if you cannot go to NNPC unless you have certain qualifications, and they have a different career pattern, and their job is more challenging, certainly you will be paid more. The public service has always been flexible, and so it's not the problem that you can have people who earn more because they work at CBN than people who work in the in Ministry of Women Affairs, for instance, as a level 12 admin officer. They are all public servants. I think the key issue to recognize here is how do you create a public service where remuneration is both fair, meaning that it can actually sustain you as a civil servant,
not the minimum
because you
wage.
chose to be a civil servant, can sustain you without allowing you to indulge in the temptation of being corrupt.
Yes.
And also that you can actually render the kind of service for which you are being paid. That has always been the tussle in the public service. Now, so the question really is the civil servant receiving a fair compensation such that he's not corrupt? The reason why, and I keep going back to this thing, I know that he can't say some of these things here, but the simple truth about it is the reason why we haven't seen some of those key recommendations in the so-called Orasanya report see the light of day is there are too many interests too many interests in terms of maintenance of the status quo. They make money for people. Legislators, when they exercise oversight or when they design budgets, there's something in it for them when they keep some of
going their way.
Yes, there are permanent secretaries who will resist the scrapping of agencies and parastatals under their ministries, and they're permanent secretaries now.
Doctor, it appears a lot of work from what he's saying, interest left, right, and center. As a final remark, how will you achieve some of the reforms you are doing? I just want this in a minute or less. Vis-a-vis secret recruitment, you can see secret recruitment happenings where people in the National Assembly, in the executive, left, right, and center, sneaking in their candidates. I want just a summary.
Okay, now let me touch what my senior brother has spoken about.
Yeah. In brief, because we are already.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I wish we have more time. Yes.
Yes. Now the Orasanya report.
Yes.
That is very popular. When you look at the reforms that we have done outside Orasanya report, they are more important. They have added value to the service beyond Orasanya report. So I want Nigerians to look at what we have done over the years, support that, and look less at the side of Orasanya. Time and evolution of ways of delivering service will take care of this, or some of these issues that we've discussed. Now, apart, you asked me something about jobs and
yes, and being sneaked. Yeah.
Well,
especially in so-called juicy agencies.
Before I talk about that, I know federal government have constituted a committee to look at the salary differentials between civil and public service, to see how something will be done. The head of civil service is the chairman of that committee. Don't know how far they've gone, but I know government is doing that. And jobs under the table, on the table, beside the table, I'm not aware of that.
At all, sir?
Yes, I'm not aware of that. I just hear people talking about that. Whatever the case is, the reforms we are driving, making the service more open, making our work more transparent, making it difficult for any person to have a black shade or cover to do things that are not supposed to be done.
Okay, thank you. In a word or two, how can the government get it right, Doctor?
We need a very good political level that appreciates the work of the public service. You need to have a president and governors who will genuinely recognize the fact that governance is 90% the work of the public servant, the civil servant. If you can do that, and you allow them enough scope, and you incentivize them enough, you will get quality governance in place. And you must curb corruption. A political leadership which is corrupt cannot stop public servants from being corrupt. You have to give people living wages. You can't be giving somebody 50,000 naira.
Not minimum wage, but living.
No, a living wage. You can't be giving somebody 50,000 naira a month and you expect them to come. That money alone will last him, just if he uses it for transport alone, only 1 week.
Just
to come from home and to go back, just on transport alone. This is crazy. And yet politicians take home millions and millions of money home. It's wrong. The real people who do the work of government are the civil servants.
And they should be taken
Why
care of.
should legislators and ministers and presidents and governors be taking hundreds of millions home? It's wrong.
Doctor, we thank you very much for honoring this invitation and for your well-informed explanation on the issues around the public service. And the director, I also wish to thank you very much for having time to come and tell Nigerians what you are doing, and we hope those who are supposed to help you in fine-tuning the civil service and reforming it to be that of world standard will actually work on some of the things you mentioned. Well, viewers, that's a wrap on today's program, and we hope those that matter will actually act on this matter. This is where we come to the end of the program. I am Hamza Idris.